for our equality, and how we had no choice but to continue to add to their legacy of leadership and advocacy, for we stand on the shoulders of giants. It is our obligation to continue to build off of what has been provided to us by our ancestors for the next generations to come. When I first heard the phrase, "each one, teach one," spoken by KRS-One, it resonated with me in such a way that it became a part of my mantra. The phrase gave me a clear understanding of my purpose in life. I understood that after I came into my own, I would also have a responsibility of ushering someone else along. Upon completing further research, to my surprise, I found that the term is actually an African proverb from slavery. Because blacks were not allowed to learn or read, certain courageous free blacks, white sympathizers, and literate slaves understood that despite the risk of being severely beaten, tortured, or even lynched, that it was important that the knowledge was passed on in order for enslaved people to eventually triumph over their captivity. The phrase "each one, teach one" literally meant that any and every educated slave had an automatic obligation to teach another slave to read. The urgency that motivated people in that time to commit to an all-for-one mentality for the advancement of the whole community was catalyzed by the dire constraints of the conditions and the critical need for immediate change. Although we're not living in those conditions today, we are still faced with several social disparities, and there's still a need for critical, immediate change. Today we are blessed to be one of the most self-determining generations in our history, and yet we are the most disconnected from our communal responsibility. We have the most collective wealth amongst us than ever before, and yet our communities remain the most impoverished. We have more access to education, and yet statistics show that we send more boys to prison than we do to college. We have more freedom to be liberal with our actions, and yet we're the most careless with the representations of our culture, the portrayal of our images, and the preservation of our great history. We of this time have benefited the most from past African American struggles, and yet we're the most selfish and the most apathetic towards the current African American crises. Many of our entertainers, who are very often the frontline representatives of our images, whether we like it or not, they're also disconnected from this obligation. Today, many of our artists and entertainers are viewed by our youth as their only source of leadership because of the constant media exposure and the platforms that these entertainers have. Although many artists don't always want the weight of the responsibility of being a positive role model, they should be mindful that sometimes our youth do not distinguish between an entertainer's role as an artist versus their role as a leader. And why should they? The obligation to lead comes with the platform. If you have a platform, power, influence, resources, and/or the intellect to serve your people, and you know that there's an evident crisis plaguing your community, and the content that you emit to your audience exasperates the crisis, then you are part of the problem. For example, I'm perplexed that despite the alarming statistics showing that African Americans are in the midst of an HIV/AIDS crisis, many entertainers continue to promote hypersexual content and glorify hedonistic, lewd sexual behavior as a form of artistic expression with no concern for the consequences that they know that their messages have on the young audiences that they know their material is often marketed and promoted to. Using the same imagery and the same toxic messaging that objectifies, insults, dishonors, and disrespects our women, the same imagery and messaging that has our 12 and our 13-year-olds included regularly in statistics on sexually transmitted diseases, the same imagery and messaging that helps to continue the cycle of teenage baby mamas and baby daddies, the same imagery that distorts teen girls' perception of what is age appropriate, the imagery that has them dressing and acting beyond their years, and as a result, predators propositioning these underage girls in our communities every day. The same imagery that makes some of our boys think it's okay to touch our girls without their permission. These messages are dangerous and they're selfish, for they reinforce the message to impressionable young minds that they are not worth more than their physical selves, and that their power exists below their waist and not above their shoulders. And that message puts our kids further at risk. It's also predatory to knowingly promote explicit sexual material to children. And while this war predator mentality permeates all pop culture today, it affects affects blacks disproportionately due to the many social overlapping disparities that we face. Now, I understand that corporate entities may be the major culprit given their control over the industry, but this does not remove the accountability that an artist has to their community. Because if you came from us, and we supported you, and we made you better, then you also have a responsibility to also try to make us better. It is particularly concerning to me that many women in entertainment now demonstrate a severe disregard of their obligation to display an allegiance with women, or uphold our images, or honor the sanctity of womanhood. Despite the gains that women have made in history, has the culture of sexism now become so appealing in this country that women have started to adopt it too? In a time when girls filter and in some cases, in a lot of cases, internalize negative hypersexual images emitted by mass media outlets, it is important that young women also have role models and stakeholders who affirm to them that they are unique, gifted, and brilliant, and to assure them that they bear relevant contributions to deliver this world. Unfortunately, a lot of women in media and entertainment are attempting to redefine women's empowerment and will blatantly betray women while saying that they are empowering women. But oftentimes they are just cloaked in a feminist cloth while wearing a misogynistic overcoat and a testosterone patch, which has them thinking and acting under the influence, co-signing the damaging portrayals of women, and or taking the position that the sexual exploitation of women, the objectification of women, the promotion of the body distortion of women, the stereotyping of women, and the promotion of sexually explicit material to young girls are all actually expressions of empowerment, as long as the woman is a willing participant, and as long as the women who are being exploited, or in some cases the women who are doing the exploiting, are benefiting financially from it. When women are at the helm of putting out these messages as a form of artistic expression, or it's just business, and then they claim it to be female empowerment, these decisions come at the expense of disenfranchising and subordinating other women who seek to be recognized for their intrinsic qualities rather than their sexual prowess. Now, I'm not saying that we can't be sexy. Duh, we're women. Sexy comes with the packaging. But making your sex appeal the root of your identity, that's not sexy. That's like icing, no cake. It also distorts the message of what empowerment really means. Let's examine the meaning of empowerment. Empowerment is the concept that defines the process of increasing the spiritual, economic, and social strength of an individual or a community. However, when an individual's perception and expressions of empowerment come at the expense of the community, it's ultimately disempowering. In other words, there's a cost to benefit ratio that we must consider. If the messages and the images that you promote disenfranchises the lives of the millions of people that your messages reach in the process, then we can no longer call that an act of empowerment. It's like drug dealers slinging crack to the communities and then giving out turkeys on Thanksgiving with the money that they made on the crack, and then calling themselves community leaders. True empowerment fosters the development and the sustainability of whole communities. Research has proven that the many negative images portraying women of color as objects with little worth beyond their physical attributes has actively affected the way many of our young girls see themselves today. And the absence of more balanced and more positive imagery of women of color has contributed to a broad range of social issues for millions of girls, affecting their self-image, their academic performance, and their life decisions that they make when they go into adulthood. Unfortunately, many people still do not want to admit that there is any correlation between the images and the words on TV and radio and the decline of our youth. Some people see speaking out in the defense of our women and our girls as an attack on our artists. Those people who don't want to admit that there is a problem are also a part of the problem, much like the slaves who question why we need to leave Massa's house when slavery was abolished. Harriet Tubman said that she could have freed a lot more slaves if they'd actually only known they were slaves. Our communities have a responsibility to speak up about the inappropriate behavior of our leaders and our entertainers and hold them accountable for their actions. Unfortunately, all too often, when we as a community see someone who looks like us winning, even even by blatantly exploiting us, we will still cheer them on. When do we say something? Who's going to say something? Our youth are in crisis. We have a crime crisis, we have a dropout crisis, we have a gang crisis, an HIV/AIDS crisis, a teenage pregnancy crisis, we have an imprisonment crisis for both men and women, we have a homicide crisis, a health crisis, a poverty crisis, an abuse crisis, we have an education crisis, an illiteracy crisis, we have a walking while black crisis. As Tom Morell said in his book Brainwashed, we're at the top of every bad list, and we're at the bottom of every good list. We promote a culture of greed and gluttony and materialism, while over 10 million black and Hispanic children live below the poverty line, and over 1 million black children live in extreme poverty. We've traded our communal sense of modesty and self-respect and dignity for voyeurism and lust, while sexually transmitted disease numbers continue to rise at alarming rates in our community. We continue to exaggerate black pathologies of buffoonery in our expressions of art, while corporations and poverty pimps profit off of our demise. And while this is going on, there are certain people amongst us who feel that they are the untouchables, the special blacks, who take an apathetic disposition on the black crisis as if their economic class excludes them from the issues facing the rest of us blacks. We are all connected and we are all affected. And we cannot expect to heal if we continue to condone and to endorse messages that undermine, exploit, and deceive our youth into believing that they don't have to exceed beyond their limits, that they don't have to strive for excellence, or that the destructive and dysfunctional behavior that they are often emulating is the key to their success. We have to teach our kids to think critically. We need to give them hope and give them courage, and we have to teach them the meaning of compassion. We have to give them confidence, and we have to strengthen them, and we must provide them with the tools that they need to make measurable progress in reasonable time so that they can become more valuable citizens and future leaders. Thank you.